Welcome to a world where particles, vibrations, and light collide, a place where leading industry experts and healers come together to discuss controversial topics that will challenge your beliefs and expand your mind. From quantum physics to metaphysics, no topic is off limits, but this is not your typical podcast.
Always be in your integrity, and in your integrity you understand that it is what it is. Energy is until it's not, right? Energy is flowing into your body until it stops flowing because it becomes so clogged up, and then disease begins, right? So be in your integrity. When somebody's saying something that you totally disagree with, don't sit in your mind and go, what an idiot, right? Just say, wow, they're really convicted on how they feel. That's amazing. Bless them in their thoughts. Don't be judgmental in their thoughts. Bless them for having the power to feel the way they feel, even if it's different from you.
It's a show guaranteed to make you question your assumptions and push you to expand your horizons. For those who are already fascinated or passionate about the work of Patti Conklin, this show will give you an inside look into the mind of one of the industry's most renowned figures in vibrational mediation. With over 28 years of experience and a long list of big-name collaborations, Patti's insights and perspectives will inspire and challenge even the most seasoned practitioners. And if you're the skeptic who doesn't believe in vibrational mediation, this show is for you. Healers, doctors, and scientists are just a few of the professions represented by our fascinating visitors that bring their unique perspective to every episode. Join us on this journey into the world of healing within and adventure inside. Our mission is to inspire, challenge, and enlighten our audience with thought-provoking conversations and fascinating guests from a wide range of fields who can shed new light on important issues facing society today. Join us for each episode if you're ready to explore and learn about the latest developments at the intersection of cutting-edge science, spirituality, and self-improvement. Enter a world where waves, particles, and light all meet. Enter the world of healing within and adventure inside.
Thank you so much for joining me today and my guest, Gabrielle Myers, and I'm going to be calling her Gabby because she feels like a Gabby. But we're going to be talking about her adventures in life from farm to table, what she's doing now. But Gabby, tell us a little bit about you. What made you interested in the culinary aspects of life and organics?
My parents were avid gardeners. They both worked a lot, but their kind of pleasure and their release happened in the garden. And so they always had this elaborate vegetable garden when they could, depending on their work schedule. My grandparents did as well. And so growing up, I often was sent to go harvest the raspberries or pick the lettuce greens, harvest the cauliflower and so forth, dig up the onions. And I fell in love with all the potential that happens in the garden. That's really, I think, where everything starts in life is with a garden, right? That's a metaphor, but also it's something really practical. Like you're growing something and then you're digesting it and eating it, and it's nourishing you and sending you forth in the world. And so that's really how my love of the farm to table experience and really cooking emerged from that. So when I was in college, I did an internship at the Center for Historic Plants, which was part of Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. And one day a week I got sent up on the mountain and I worked in the organic gardens. They had basically raised beds and little plots of land where they had the vegetables and the fruits that Thomas Jefferson grew. And it was all organic because that's the way they did it back in Thomas Jefferson's time.
Right.
And so I would be sent home with produce because they didn't have any means of getting rid of it. It's not like they had a restaurant there or anything. So they just give the produce like beautiful squash. And I remember the oregano and the marjoram was so fragrant that I would take home, and the peppers were just like perfect in the hot Virginia summer. And I'd take those home and cook them for my parents. And, it was the summer I was at home with my folks and cooked with them. And I just remember falling in love with all that whole process of you're tending the earth. There's nothing there. It's like this barren landscape. And then you plant a seed in it and something grows, and then it has a fruit or a leaf that you can take and cook or just serve raw. And then you're sending that love to another human being in the most like elemental and beautiful way when they're digesting it and appreciating it. And it's nourishing them and carrying them forward to hopefully have a positive experience for the rest of their day.
Right.
And so that's where that love emerged. I also then ended up in my late 20s, basically working in mid to late 20s, working in restaurants. I went to culinary school in San Francisco, the California Culinary Academy, and then worked in Bay Area restaurants for about 14 years. So restaurants, catering companies, all sorts of levels of cooking. And I really appreciated almost on any level what cooking a meal for somebody can do for them. Whether it's a small meal for friends or a 12 top that you're doing a catering for, 350 covers that you're knocking out on a Saturday night in a restaurant, or a 4,000 event for some corporate party, in San Francisco. It's really neat to see how much people can appreciate food and how food can really help us transcend all sorts of boundaries that we have falsely set up in our heads, I think.
Yeah. I clearly have lots of false boundaries set up in my head because, when you say the word cooking, I take it home and cook for my parents and so forth. I'm like, I can make gravy curdle just by looking at it. My son started cooking when they were 6, 7 years old. Because it was a survival instinct, because I was so bad at it. And even if I have the cookbook and I do everything right, it's not in my energetic character to do. And it's scary. And it sounds like you have just created this, clearly there's love inside your heart for what you're doing, because that's coming out loud and clear. Was it just a natural for you?
So when I first started cooking, really struggled to learn the basics of it because my parents, God love them, they're really good at growing food, but they weren't so hot with the cooking of it. Please forgive me, Mom and Dad. I love you guys so much. But they're often busy. Both my parents were workaholics, so they worked 12 to 15-hour days. Cooking was kind of the last thing they thought about. And so when I was younger, often I would be the one that would be called on to put the pasta water on to boil, get the sauce going and stuff like that. And so when I started, I knew I loved food and I wanted to pursue it, especially, after my experiences at Monticello and I also worked in a bunch of different plant nurseries and so forth. And so I knew I loved food, but I wasn't really sure what to do with it. And so in culinary school, I learned a lot. The first restaurant I worked at was a farm to table Italian restaurant where we would get whole hogs in, whole pigeons, lamb whole, and we'd have to butcher it all down. And so for me there, really, I started learning, and it was a hard learn. I worked really hard to learn the basics of cooking, but we learned the basics of making sausage, rotisserie and grilling, searing fish, making pasta, cooking pasta. And so it's a never ending journey, I think, with food and learning. And really it takes a good instructor. So I was lucky that I had wonderful mentors like Paul Canellis and Paul Bertoli, and Guy Fournette and a few, other wonderful people that really took the time to teach. So I was in a kitchen that was focused, I felt on excellence, but also on really teaching people, because they realized the team is where it's at. It's not so much this fancy head chef, but it's the team you have behind you. And so they really took the time to explain things and let us practice and let us screw things up and, mess up a fish and then try it again, not serve it, but try to get it perfect in our minds. And so it really took many years of that type of training and mentorship before I felt fluent. But the cool thing is once you train and you practice in a skill, then you can take that base experience to a lot of different types of approaches within that career. So with cooking, for instance, I worked at a very, elevated farm to table place in the Bay Area. But then because of that experience, I was able to then go to a catering company where we'd slam out 4,000 to 5,000 heads, in a corporate event, doing tasting menus and little things like that, or serve a big thing at pasta, at a cafeteria when I was hard in going into school and stuff like that. So serving 5,000 people at a cafeteria, you can do all that once you really take the time to train, I think. And it's got kind of training from everything.
That just seems so overwhelming. I mean, you just put that number out, 5,000. Doesn't it take a year to get the food ready for 5,000 people?
It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of planning, and you have to really crunch the numbers and think carefully so you don't screw yourself when it comes to like your food costs and so forth and your labor costs. So I'd say like the most important thing is really like planning based on experience. And then also, you prepare basically in batches days before an event.
Yeah.
Like I mean, that wasn't often, but I think I did like maybe 3 to 5 events of 4,000 to 5,000. Those aren't, common in the type of cooking that I did, but you just really take time to prepare strategically. Think about what you can prepare a few days ahead of time, what you have to prepare the night before, what you have to prepare starting at like 5 a.m, the night of the event, how many people you need and so forth. So it does take a lot of preparation, but it's possible. And I think it's possible to kick out some pretty good food, if you really do take the time to plan and source your ingredients from places where they really have strong produce, I think, and strong materials.
Right. How do you look or teach or consult someone who's cooking for one? Kids are grown, grandkids. I mean, I put a frozen pizza in the oven for my grandkids last week because it's the only one that the boy will eat. And I put it on the timer and I brought it out and he just looks at it and he's like, seriously, you even messed up the pizza? And I'm like, how did I mess up the pizza? I don't understand. He wouldn't touch it. I guess, I don't know what was going on with it, but I know that, for me, cooking for me, it just seems to be a challenge cooking for one. And I'm not the only one that I hear that from. A lot of us who are single, who are cooking for ourselves and so forth, it just seems like it's so hard. How do you make it easy to cook for one?
So I think it is hard, but I think approaches thinking about what you want to eat, what's good for you too. And then starting it with like, it's really simple preparations. Like often if you're cooking for yourself, you don't want to spend 2 hours cooking your dinner or your lunch. I'm personally like sometimes like 15 minutes and I'm good, or 10. But I think thinking of simple preparations, like one of my favorite approaches is, I try to eat healthy. I'm not always that good, but like take a chicken breast, or you can take a chicken thigh, add some olive oil, salt and pepper, and maybe I like paprika, so I'll put that on it. Maybe add some garlic, put it in the oven. And then maybe depending on the size of the chicken thigh, because sometimes if they're thick, they're going to obviously take longer to cook than if they're small. Throw it in the oven at 350 to 375, and maybe like 15 or 20 minutes in. This time of year, zucchini would be wonderful. So take some zucchini, chop it up, throw it in the pan. Maybe if I have some fresh tomatoes, cut those up, put that in the pan. Some onion might be nice. It kind of depends, but summer vegetables, eggplant would work, peppers, and cook those for another 15 to 20 minutes or so while the chicken breast or chicken thigh cooks. And then you have something really delicious that's nourishing and wonderful for you. I think too, like sometimes cooking in batches can be helpful. So think about maybe on a Sunday night, what you want to have for lunch 2 or 3 times in the coming week, or for dinner 2 or 3 times in the coming week. And you can cook that base and then add on to it, right? So like rice would be something that's nice to like, rather than cook rice every night, cook enough for the week. Or polenta is one of my favorite dishes. And so you can cook a good amount of polenta, lay it out in a pan, cool it. And then once it's cool, you can slice it into chunks, maybe like this big, and then you can throw it in the oven. Some people fry it, but frying is probably not the most healthy thing for us. And so I just throw it in the oven with a little olive oil on the base, and it can kind of caramelize and crisp up. And then you can saute vegetables or add, beef and vegetables, stir fry that a little bit and throw it on top. And there you have a nice quick meal. So there are approaches like that, I think, that really make it easy to eat in a healthy way, make it easy so you're not going through all these steps on a busy week.
So overwhelmed.
Straightforward, but it's like super good for you. So it's much better to eat at home than eat out. Like I've worked in the industry for many years, like, eat out restaurants, it's great. Like, but the truth is a lot of times in restaurants, we cook with canola oil, we add a lot of salt, it's expensive. Now, like it's pretty expensive to eat out. So what I like to do is I tend to always eat at home and then save up for a really nice meal at a place where I know it's like going to be, wow, this is an event. This is an experience, not just stopping by, a fast food place or a sandwich shop. I try to really like think about how I'm spending the money that I'm spending out and make it worth it. But cook at home, you save so much money. It's so much better for you. You can really, follow and control your diet in a meaningful way.
Yeah. I know we have a restaurant here in Atlanta that I like to go to every once in a while. But it has all local, whether it's meats, whether it's vegetables, but what's in season at the time and so forth. And I love it because it's all organic. It tastes wonderful, and you never know what's going to be on the menu because it changes daily.
That's exciting.
So talk to me about farm to table, because it seems like that's much more of a thing now. Maybe not so much in small towns like where I live here, but more in bigger cities and so forth. Is that something that you think will be sustainable, or has it been sustainable?
I think so. I think it's much more sustainable than kind of the corporate or the unseasonal approach, where we're getting like tomatoes from Mexico or cucumbers from Mexico in like New England in the winter. So the farm to table, that basic concept is you source food from as locally as possible. Depending on where you are, that is going to vary, but the general guidance is like within 100 miles is considered local. And why you would do that is you save on fuel costs. So the food should cost less to produce, and you're not polluting the environment unnecessarily with fossil fuels.
Right.
You're also getting it's fresher, hopefully, because it hasn't traveled as far. So we don't have to worry about picking tomatoes before they're ripe. You pick them when they're ripe. They travel maybe an hour or 20 minutes, and then you're buying them and you're eating them. So there's that. Also, I think the food is healthier if you eat it shortly after it is picked. So they've done studies in like a piece of lettuce, if you let it sit for 2 weeks, is not going to be as good for you as if you ate it the next day after picking or the day of picking. Same thing, I think for corn, it tends to revert to starch and be less sweet if you store it. And things like that apply really to, I think, all different types of fruits and vegetables. And so there's a health reason too. I think it's also really nice and satisfying to support your local food system, where often you have independent or smaller producers, like small family farms and individuals that are really like spending money in the community, employing people in the community. So it's really like a local force where you're engaging with the people around you and like giving them some love, and nourishment with the money.
Absolutely.
There are huge companies like Cisco and ConAgra and like these huge corporate food systems where things are brought in mass from very different regions, often very different countries, into our food system. And yes, that's less expensive. I think it's less nourishing. In the end, maybe it's more expensive on our environment, and in terms of like creating maybe an unsustainable system for our local economies, or even for the US in general. So I think it's really important to think about where you spend your food money, and really you do vote with your dollars. That's almost become a cliche, but it's true. You do. Where you spend your money, it matters really on a deep level, I think. Plus, it's really satisfying to me. Like, one thing I was always excited about when I worked at farm to table restaurants is the farmers would come in and you could see their dirt stained hands, where they pulled up the onion that morning, and you smell the dirt, and you talk to them, and often, we give them a free plate of food, and they would enjoy it and talk to us about what is happening on the farm. And so there's also that human connection that speaks beyond money or even food nourishment. It's like nourishing our souls, I think, to talk to the people and know the people that are producing your food. And there's a story behind your food. And I think having a story behind your food makes you appreciate it so much more. It does matter where things come from. It does matter where it was grown, how it was grown, the person who grew it, their life story, all that stuff, I think, really plays a part in the feeding of our souls.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there restaurants that will give backstories on the foods? I mean, do they incorporate that in their marketing of the farmers that are growing and are the ones responsible for bringing such wonderful food into the restaurant?
I think the smart chefs and the smart restaurant owners will do that. So the ones that I worked with that were very successful and kind of were, I think, pioneers in the movement. I worked at Oliveto Restaurant in the Bay Area, which unfortunately just recently closed. But the owner, the owners, Bob and Maggie Klein, were always really good at telling the story. And really it was less about them, right? And, oh, I'm this great restaurateur. It was more about, this is where our food comes from, and this is why it is important, and this is why we cook with it, you know, and why it's nourishing you. And so Bob used to be a documentary filmmaker, I think for PBS, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So he would create videos of Paul Willis and his farm in Iowa, and talking about why Paul does what he does, how he's, I think, a third or fourth generation pig farmer in Iowa, why he practices this certain approach to pigs and letting them socialize and have, you know, communication with each other and build those networks, and why they're fed what they're fed. And that story, you know, was told in a little mini documentary that they had on their website. And it's a way of connecting the customer with the food and the food producers in this intimate way, where you really understand why it's so important, and why this might cost a few bucks more than something, you know, from super industrial ag that's not really treated with care and respect. Like the farmers respect and care for their animals, and, you know, love them as much as you can and treat them in a humane way. Yeah, you know, I know the argument, we're killing them in the end, but, you know, at least they had a good life up until that point. It really does matter. But telling the story of the person that is picking your arugula, you know, that really is smart, I think, because it's a way of sending the message of your farm to table restaurant out to the community in a way that they can digest. People love stories, and they love personal stories, and that makes them invest really their heart and their soul in what they're eating, you know, and what they're paying for. Right. Because obviously it's not cheap to eat out at a farm to table restaurant usually. So you need to justify why you're charging what you're charging, because it's not cheap to buy it. And it's not cheap for people to grow it. But it's worth it.
It's quite a circle. Have you written anything about farm to table yet? Are you doing articles? What are you?
Yes.
How are you getting your word out? Talk to me about it.
Originally, I got into writing about the farm to table experience through my memoir, Hive Mind, which details my time on an organic farm in the Sacramento Valley of California. And that basically it centered around a time in 2006 where I was working with a female farmer, an activist female farmer who's really like gunning for farm workers and farm rights and so forth. We grew a lot of organic heirloom vegetables. And so I write about that experience in my memoir, Hive Mind. There's also a lot of stuff in there too about, I think, approach to life, falling in love with life, and making a commitment to sustain ourselves through challenging moments in family and personal lives. And so that was my entryway into kind of like the farm to table connection, because I also wrote about my restaurant experiences prior to that farm experience and so forth. And then I got recently, I wrote a few articles too for different magazines, reporting on farmers and chefs and so forth. And then recently I've become the farm to fork columnist for Inside Sacramento magazine, which has been just such a wonderful experience where I get to interview farmers and food purveyors like fishmongers and so forth, and detail really their experiences and why they do what they do and why that's important for all of us. And so far I've had free reign to take it in the direction that I want to go. And I've really enjoyed that experience. I also write a lot of poetry, and my first poetry book called Too Many Seeds was released in December of last year. And in that collection, a lot of my poetry in that collection was inspired by my time on that organic farm or my time working in restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area, and also my time working at a dried fruit factory in the Central Valley of California, where really I was exposed to the opposite of the farm to table experience. So this is like corporate ag to the limit, you know, where they sprayed things with methyl bromide and got things in big freighters from Argentina, you know, and so forth, and packed it and sent it off across the world. And so that those poems really kind of work in contrast to the farm inspired poems. And again, that collection is called Too Many Seeds. So basically it's poetry on food and nourishment.
Wow. And so is that the only poetry book you've written so far? Are you working on more?
I have two written that I'm getting published. Break Self Feed was the collection I worked on right after Too Many Seeds. And so I'm looking for a publisher for that. And then Points in the Network is a collection I actually just finished about 2 weeks ago, which is they're more recent poems. Okay. Most of my poetry deals with the natural environments and, you know, in human relationships and human existence, how we kind of interact with that, work with it, and sometimes in contrast to it, and also what we can learn from paying attention to natural patterns, what we can learn for ourselves, but also how to be in community with each other.
Right. I mean, it really takes me back to childhood where, we were from a very, poor town. And so what my brother and I shot, which was, rabbits or squirrels or, caught fishing, is what we had for dinner that night. I mean, it was just what we provided. And then a lot of sharing amongst the neighbors with vegetables and eggs and, that kind of stuff. It was a very small community. And it was a very lovely community. And it sounds like maybe we're stepping back into that a little bit with the farm to table of just, not having it within the household, but having it within the community.
I think there's wonderful potential in that when you think about the bartering system too, and what you can do trading with your neighbors. Like you might be really good at growing corn, blue corn, say, or something, and somebody else might be great at growing cucumbers, and somebody else might be great at growing chickens. And by doing and sharing, really you can live, I think, a very rich and fulfilled life in that exchange and in that respect for what another human being does well. Yeah, it's healthier too, for all those reasons we talked about. It's just like coming from that pond right over there, or the bay there and the field right next to you. So I think there's a lot of potential in that for the future.
Yeah. How exciting. Is there a, in my travels around the country, if I get traveling again, is there like one restaurant, not that you have to like do a massive advertising, but is there an area that I want to scope out and to get a really amazing organic meal?
So I'm a big fan of the Sacramento food scene. It's not as hot in everyone's mind as San Francisco. And yeah, there are wonderful restaurants in San Francisco, but a lot of them have kind of had their day, done their thing. What I love about the Sacramento food scene is Sacramento is right in the middle of the valley where most of the food that Americans eat is grown and produced. And so, in other words, most of the tomatoes that you get canned in Campbell's soup or, Progresso or whatever, they come from this valley.
Yeah.
The cucumbers, I'd say the squash, I could go on olives, pecans, pistachios. They're all produced within 100 miles of Sacramento. And Sacramento was known as a cow town where there wasn't much going on. You maybe had like cattlemen's and in and out and nothing really exciting. But I think over the last I just moved there not too long ago, but I think over the last 10, 12 years, the chefs there have really started to understand their local environment and all they can do with the food there. And so there are a lot of very highly trained chefs that are pulling produce from like not even 100 miles. We're talking maybe 10 to 15 miles from their restaurants. And they're wonderful grass-fed beef producers. Like Avdis Ranch is a place that I went and visited recently, and they're grass-fed beef within Sacramento city limits, which people might be like, ugh, that sounds gross, but it's beautiful pasture land. Actually, it's like it's very healthy and vibrant. We have olive oil from Bariani, maybe like 30 minutes away. I mean, there's just so many wonderful producers in our area. And then people are cooking with the food from their local environment. And so there are places like the Water Boy Restaurant, which has incredible food. And they have a very strong connection with the local farmers. They do some wonderful work there. And so that's one of my favorite places to go. They used to have a place called 10 Speed, which is like a trattoria style, and they had pizza and so forth. But I think they've since closed, which is unfortunate. But
Awesome. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show. And I hope to have you back on. I'm gonna practice some of your YouTube items and have you back on and see how successful I am.
Thank you so much, Patti. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you. I look forward to talking with you again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Blessings to you.
Blessings to you.